Hey y'all, thanks for joining in. Tap the screen. It's gonna take me a second to adjust here. I'm gonna invite Dr. Kaishian now. We can do this. Hey, Jay's here, I think. Good evening. Thanks for being here, y'all. Yay, we did it.
Hey.
Gosh, that was way smoother than I thought it would be.
I know that I actually get a lot of anxiety around initiating these types of platforms, but
Same. Glad to see everybody's here.
yeah, nice to see your face, Mario.
It's great seeing you. Oh my gosh, what a season.
I know. I love how we've stayed pretty connected though, despite, some antagonizing forces.
Yes, for sure. Well, welcome everybody who's joining us right now. I'm glad y'all are here. If you want to ask questions and stuff, you could put them. There's a little question thing. I think that'll help us kind of stay on track. As for myself, for my own, staying track purposes, I'm not going to pay too much attention to the chat because I get distracted really easily. But just know that I'm so glad you're here, and it's good to have everybody in on this conversation. And I'm obviously super excited to have Patty Kaishian on here with us. It's just again, it's been a crazy year and lots been going on, and I know lots been happening in your world too, with your paper coming out and a couple interviews that have really just stuck with me too. And we've been just processing, especially your last interview. And so really excited to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Thanks for creating the space as you do so well for so many people. So it's really meaningful to me to have your friendship and your company here tonight. So thank you. And I know you guys over at POC Fungi have been super busy too, putting on all sorts of cool events and creating all sorts of spaces for people to share medicine and stories. And it's really, I feel a little sad that we live on the opposite end of the country, but I'm excited for just the possibility of us connecting in person sometime soon.
Yeah, I know. Me too. It's something I'm always dreaming about, and I'm sure everybody here in Kumi land, in San Diego, Southern California, would love to have you here and would really welcome you, coming and hanging out with us. So, yeah. So, anytime you want to do that, or you have a home here.
Thanks.
Yeah, if you want to get away from the cold weather for a little bit, enjoy some sun.
Oh God, yeah. I constantly fantasizing. Actually, today we had our first proper snowstorm in central New York, so that made me feel actually pretty happy, to be honest. Yeah, it's been otherwise just sort of cold and rainy, so when the snow comes, it's actually really nice.
Awesome. Well, for my own nerves and my own mental health purposes, I'm gonna take a deep breath, and if everybody wants to kind of just join me in a deep breath, and we could all kind of just connect across Turtle Island and this earth wherever we're at. And
yeah, welcome.
Glad you're here. Hope everybody's well and families are well, and wishing everybody good health and protection on their families and their communities. And so thanks for joining us on a Friday night, taking the time out to hang out with us a little bit. I just wanted to chat with you about just kind of all the things going on, catch up. We can keep it light. I'm down to kind of go down the rabbit hole and kind of see where we end up. But, I feel like we always have so much to talk about. Work I've been interested in your work for a long time. And I remember the first time I met you in person was at the New Moon Mycology Summit in the Adirondacks. And so shout out to the Mycelium Underground who put that together, and Olga and Charlie and Nina and Doa and everybody else who makes that event possible. Alyssa, yeah, it was a great event. Got to see a lot of great minds speak that day. And yours talk especially really stuck out for me. And just to hear you just really eloquently put so much of the theory and the things that a lot of us, two-spirited queer folks were really thinking about and excited to hear about. And I feel like you more than scratched the surface. I feel like you really dove deep and like broke it down for us. And I mean, I remember just coming back and like talking about it, to anybody who would listen. And just, yeah, just getting folks excited about this, and just adding to that dialogue around queer ecologies and just our place in this world. And so I kind of wanted to ask, or like, just wanted to see where you wanted to go with that conversation and how you wanted to,
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still, routinely feel a lot of gratitude for those who put that together, the New Moon Mycology Summit. It stands outright for me as one of the best events I've ever been like part of, in terms of like the thoroughness of the thought that went into like every level of the organization, in terms of like the folks that were platformed, from the to like the food and the way it was prepared, and the way the relatively like the sobriety of the event also. There were a lot of dimensions to it that were so thoughtful, and I really kind of keep reflecting on that even several years later. And so for all those who have not yet been able to attend the New Moon Mycology Summit, hopefully, the last couple of years they haven't run because of COVID, but hopefully we can soon, and I encourage you all to go. But yeah, I would say like since our paper was published now almost like going on a couple of years ago, which is crazy, there just really seems to be a very my getting a phone call for this like discussions around queer ecology and queer mycology certainly, but also like sorry, I just need to like make sure this person doesn't call me back.
Oh, you're
Let me
fine.
just send a quick text. I'm busy. Okay, so I basically think that there's this really potent moment for a lot of conversations around reimagining our ways of being in place with other organisms, and sort of reimagining ways in which we can overcome climate change and degradation of the earth, and do so in ways that are like have multiple points of accessibility for people coming from multiple life experiences, life histories. And I think that for me, like the entry point to that conversation was through like looking at mycology as a queer discipline. But it's funny, like actually having spent a lot of time thinking about that work, sometimes I even wish I called it something different, because while I think queer theory is really central to this idea, I wonder if that is, I think there's so much like more going on than just like queer theory. I think I'm very interested in like the sort of philosophy of science, of like questions about how we form knowledge, and how that knowledge is placed in certain hierarchies, and whether those hierarchies are valuable or just damaging, or sometimes both at the same time. So while the title is called queer theory, the science underground mycology is a queer discipline. It is, I think, more. It goes beyond beyond queerness into like touching many other sectors of our lives, and whether or not you can identify or have familiarity with queer theory explicitly. There are many ways to engage with like kind of trying to disrupt established knowledge institutions, and doing so, and there's many entry points for that. It doesn't, so I just sometimes I wonder if it was like too narrowly titled, but because I do like the author, my co-author, and I explore a lot of different dimensions to science and what it means to conduct science. So it's something that I think there's entry points through looking at different types of identity, certainly a racialized identity, ability, and many other avenues as well. So
I love that you just jumped right into it. We're not, it's not 10 minutes into the conversation and we're already having this talk. I hope everybody's keeping up.
yeah, sorry, I like keep it light is like not, I don't know how to do that.
No, I feel you. No, and I'm glad we're kind of jumping into it like that. You know, uh, I appreciate it. Um, I mean, there's so much I want to keep adding to that, and I'm like, where do you want to go with this?
Yeah.
And so,
Well,
I guess, yeah, go ahead.
no, you go.
Um, no, I mean, well, just some of the things, that I'm thinking about, just off the bat, is, I was listening to the podcast again, and you were talking about Linnaeus and just some of those things, just some of those like early ways, this field was like formed and like languages was formed around fungi. I wanted to agree too with you with your point about like just the depth of the paper and like how far y'all went into it, because you started going into like histories and anthropologies and like it's like really there's like a lot you're looking at. You mentioned a lot of Anna Singh's work,
Mhm.
and so I kind of wanted to go down that road a little bit, exploring like how like why was it they like how were you seeing all those connections, and like
Mhm.
how you brought it all in, because it's for I mean it's just hard to like put into words for somebody like me, but you did it so well, and I'm just like, whoa, how did you tie all that together so well?
Thank you. That's so nice of you. I guess so it was an idea that I was sort of marinating for a long time leading up to writing it. So pretty much I started writing this in the final year or this like the kind of towards the beginning of the final year of my PhD program in mycology. So if you don't know me, I recently in August of 2020 defended my PhD in mycology from SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. And I really loved getting my degree there and for many reasons. Um, it's a very special school in that it has it's all environmental science. So it's a state school. So in terms of the undergrad population, it services like a broader range of student, that often would be, financially excluded from going to like the more like fancier private schools. So I like that element. And then also just the students there are so many of them are so weird in this beautiful way, like kind of like forest creatures. So I have a real kinship with them. But then also, ESF is pretty devoted to being explicit about their relationship with the Haudenosaunee people. We fly the Haudenosaunee flag at ESF, and a number of faculty are Indigenous folks themselves. And there's this very strong scholarship on traditional ecology.
Good. Yeah, I can
Yeah.
hear you.
I have an app limiter, time limiter, which I forgot to turn off, which usually is helpful. Anyway, so I had the distinct privilege of studying along with, I didn't take any of her classes, but I attended a lot of the workshops run by Robin Kimmerer and her students. So early on in my time at ESF, I like would go to like all of the workshops that she and her students put on. And I remember one in particular that was particularly excellent, and it was called Seeing Through Multiple Lenses, I believe was the title. And it was about many of the themes that she talks about in her books. If you're familiar, I know Mario, you are, but for the listeners, if like she talks often about traditional ecological knowledge as a member of the Potawatomi Nation, and then she also talks about her training as an academic scientist who specialized in botany and mosses particularly. So I definitely, that was like a real privilege to be able to like learn in that space, and that definitely like was always kind of like led to a lot of thoughts that were just sort of omnipresent for me in my path towards becoming an academic scientist. It really spoke to this other dimension of my personhood that I think I came into graduate school very like proud of, which was a person who had a lot of experience outside of traditional science. And then as I was going through school, I was really impressed in many, many ways by my science peers, but I also sometimes felt that there was this like disconnect and I couldn't really name it all the time. And sometimes it even like frustrated me, and sometimes it even like slightly scared me that there wasn't this sort of reflection on ethics, or I mean, and I'm not saying this is true for everyone, but at times in like some seminar discussions,
Sure.
we would come to this impasse where people like couldn't agree on like very basic moral grounds, and that to me that made me realize that like these conversations, like science should not be cloistered or like siloed away apart from this broader understanding of like our role as human beings, our responsibility to one
Mhm.
another, all of the ways in which we affect each other, and the way in which we interact with other human beings and non-human organisms. um, and that started to like really weigh on me, in a kind of exciting way, to be honest, but also in this like heavy way, like that felt urgent. So I felt nervous that all of the harms that institutionalized science is responsible for, would go unaddressed in the next generation of scientists, because because it wasn't part of our education. And so there's no like singular blame here. It's just sort of this idea that science needs to be accountable, if it's to be used for the betterment of society, which is, of course, I think the for most scientists, like their genuine goal, right, is to be of service to like the common good,
Right.
and explore ideas that are really exciting to them. But I think few people are kind of forced in their education to reflect on like where, sort of the social landscape in which their science is embedded. Um,
Mm.
so at first, in kind of trying to pull together these ideas, I think that was like the largest motivation, was that kind of nexus there. And then, to me, seeing like mycology was this like perfect vehicle for like rolling out this idea, because of the ways in which the uniqueness of fungal biology, both the biological elements that are fascinating and really like confounding, but then also like the ways in which the field has been kind of treated and, understudied and kind of devalued and questioned. And
Mhm.
then that like through that emerged this like perfect opportunity to like talk about the material impact of like your own society and your behavior on something that seems like completely unrelated to society and behavior, like a
Right.
mushroom.
Right.
um so it was sort of like this, like I just thought it kind of emerged as this perfect avenue for exploring that. And then, I read this book, Queer Ecologies, which is a collection of essays by different authors on different varying very different topics within queer ecology. And that really like gave me inspiration for like all the different dimensions that could be explored within this topic. So I
Right.
do recommend that collection of essays. Like, some of them are really fascinating. I mean, they're all really fascinating, and they're all really different. I couldn't do justice to try to summarize them now, but I do recommend the book. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, and if y'all haven't read um, Patty's Patty's work, it's available a few different places. I know there's a link in the POC Fungi community bio for it. And it's great, great read. Somebody asked about the podcast that I mentioned earlier. It's For the Wild podcast, and that podcast is available on there and through their link as well.
Yeah, For the Wild is a really wonderful podcast. But it's led by or hosted by Ayana Young, and a lot of really amazing guests have been on that show. So I was really like excited to be invited. But it's I think the subtitle of that podcast is like a guide for the Anthropocene, maybe.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
it's basically a lot of the episodes on that podcast are sort of about reckoning with where we are, with the state of the climate and the state of colonialism in regards to the climate. and there's some really excellent guests on that show, so I recommend all the episodes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Kind of wanted to pivot a little bit, if that's cool.
Yeah, sure.
I was, recently I was asked to take over the NAMA account, and it's been great and fun. Just kind of having a different audience and perspective on things and seeing the response there. I made it, I wanted to make sure that some of these important topics were talked about, including language. And one of the things, the POC fungi community has been challenging is, the some of the common names. I realize there's like a big discussion around, using Latin names and things like that. And I feel like some folks may have put us in the category of like that we're, against using Latin names or anything like that, which is not true, which I also, encourage using Latin names for identification purposes and communicating with different people. But we do challenge, just like some of the epistemologies and the way we use language, the way we use English, and a lot of the common names that we have for mushrooms, especially the vulture tail mushroom, are commonly known as the false turkey tail mushroom, And I feel like there's a lot of folks who understand it, and there's some folks who, been a little, hesitant towards it. And just wanted to see what your thoughts on that were, and like, if that, any of that relates to, your work and like, knowledge systems and the way we, the epistemologies, and particularly that we like go into, viewing nature, and so, yeah, I wanted to know if there was any overlap or anything that you can add to that conversation.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's a great conversation. I think that in general, it's important, in my opinion, to like stay flexible and like, and dynamic in the ways in which you're like in any type of interaction. And I think this is like true in this really broad general sense, like between humans, and then between like your subject matter, if you're a scientist or someone very interested, a citizen scientist or professional scientist. So I think that having this like ability to become aware of the like multiple realities that could be affecting a given system at any given time is just like generally like an important life skill, and certainly a critical skill in creating space that is empowered and cognizant of its history, and perhaps like interested in shaping future trajectories that are like positive and warm and connecting. So like that can be, re-examining previously held thoughts that you've had, or with the present, with new information, or it could be like challenging common names of an organism that was named perhaps in a way that was stripping of it from its like connection to indigenous people in that area, or just even if it didn't have a name that is recorded in any way ever, like some of the names have been given to organisms that are explicitly heinous. Like there have been common names of birds. Birds have gotten a lot of attention recently in discussions, rightfully so, about names that are like barbaric, like named, birds that have been named after like slaveholders who were like known to be torturously awful. And all slaveholders would be, but even particularly awful ones. And like why that's obviously that name should not be kept. Who cares how many books it's in? Like don't, like that's not even, no hesitation. But then there's more subtle things, right? Like it could be like giving a name to something that had a name for thousands of years. I've been really struck by ideas of language, names for things. Different people around the world have had names for really ancient organisms, organisms that are now extinct even. Or I think about how the Haudenosaunee had language for the Wisconsin glaciation period, which happened about 10,000 years ago, and was when the ice sheets came down through North America and covered most of like the upper Northeast and parts of the Midwest under a mile of ice, and then its retreat caused the formation of what we call the Hudson River now. But there's all sorts of language around that process that we didn't, like that. There's so much that's like literally incredible for people who've been, for our society, that is like kind of hard to imagine, I would say. So just to honor that by keeping names that have been given to people who've been in a place for thousands of years is just something that's really important. I do think that like Latin, so I, as a taxonomist, I do assign Latin names to organisms professionally. And I think that like it makes sense to have a standardized system for naming. And, I do think that at this point, it because of the millions of species that have already been described, like we could have, it does make sense to continue with the like nomenclatural rules to some extent. But I do think that also like you can have this, you can have multiple names, which we have for like all birds, for example. Like a blue jay also has a Latin name, and like, but people know it by both. And I think I think as long as like names have not been erased, then that practice is, I'm always open to kind of discussion, but to me that seems okay. Like we would have a common name, and then and sometimes the common name, or sorry, the Latin name could be very directly invoking languages used by people traditionally from that area, or by and that's best done through consulting people, like living people in groups that the species might be from or in relation to. So there's ways to be creative about it and not make it just this like sort of sad thing of, you can't say this, you can't say that, but kind of the opposite, like let's breathe new life into this, and like, and breathe like, and I don't know, like this new cherished connection between these multiple things at once. And that's like a possible thing to do.
Wow, no, thank you so much for just diving into that one too. Amazing. Thank you.
It felt a little scattered, but
well, I mean, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot to touch on for sure. I was able to follow. So thank you. Yes, a multiplicity of knowing, ways of knowing. I agree with that. Yeah. I wanted to ask about objectivity in science, and by the way, I'm open to any questions from you too, by the way. Like,
yeah, well, turn it back around.
Yeah, go back and forth. But I guess I just had some stuff written down just in case, I got stuck. But I'm thinking, I am curious, I think it relates to this question in language and like, just the tool of objectivity in science and how it's important. But also, how can like objectivity, like, can it affect a positive relationship with the person and nature? And it has
yeah. So obviously in like science as a, like, I always like to like reiterate how I define and understand science. So to me, science is a tool, and it is ideally this equal opportunity investigative tool that's based on a methodology.
Right.
So basically the construction of a question, or the observation of information, and then the construction of a question that you then investigate, and like construct a method for investigation that is like transparent and replicable. And then it's the interpretation of whatever the answers that your question generates, and then interpreting them, and then communicating them and sharing them, and then like sort of incrementally, collectively building a body of knowledge. So like science, I think, in like sometimes in like very leftist spaces, and sometimes certainly on the other end of the spectrum as well, science is sort of seen as this like kind of amorphous dogma of like institutional power. And I do want to like generally kind of push back against aspects of that, or certainly thinking about it that flatly. because that I think science is a tool. It's not good or bad. It's not progressive or regressive. Inherently, it's just sort of this way we can gather information in this and communicate it across cultures and across time. So I think that, but science is also carried out by human beings always, 100% of the time, and we're all sort of fallible and very much subject to our own emotional and cultural landscape, and our questions, even when they seem like really specific to like issues that are not related to human beings, like describing a new species of fungus from a small beetle, we actually carry at many very, like, there are so many different junctures for like human subjectivity to enter the frame, and it happens multiple, like it is inescapable. So what I tried to describe in this theory paper as well is that, like, giving evidence for the ways in which like mycology has been rendered sort of as a field of like an unworthy investigation, and it's through like many layers of like human social dynamics. So like I do believe that this applies not just to like certainly this would apply to someone conducting social science. That's very obvious. Social scientists though are pretty good, at least better than a lot of physical scientists, at like kind of reflecting on their role in an investigation. Like in sociology it's called like reflexivity, like how self-reflective are you and how much do you analyze your own position within a line of questioning. And I think that there's no training mostly for physical scientists to ask the same question. And it can lead to all sorts of really detrimental outcomes. The most egregious of which would be like eugenics. And a lot of the entire field of statistics is named after some of the most like famous eugenicists, because like all sorts of like types of elements of statistics are like really beleaguered with the history of eugenics, which is really bad. So there's just, we don't we as scientists we do not interrogate that enough, and we don't need, and we absolutely need to. So I think that there's a big I don't like, I'm not comfortable with saying like science is evil, science is like the government, or working big money corporate blah 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 like that. Some people like but I do think that that does sometimes happen, but then that's not really anymore science. That becomes this other thing. So when like if your investigation is corrupted by a pursuit of money or a pursuit of a particular outcome that would service like a type of an end goal that's not just finding out information, then you are betraying like kind of the rules of science, and then it no longer technically is science. It's something else. It's some other pursuit, right? So I think that but what happens is at the institutional level, sometimes there isn't enough like accountability and reconciliation for when these fraudulent events happen, or when corrupted events like this happen. So that's where the mistrust starts to build up. And obviously there's a lot of grounds for many different communities to mistrust sort of like institutional science, particularly in medicine. I think that's the site for most of this is the most violence has occurred at the hands of like people representing science. So I think that objectivity is the pursuit, but it's always elusive. And in order to like move towards objectivity, you have to kind of ironically reflect constantly on your own subjectivity. And the more you're transparent about that, I think the closer you can actually get to objectivity, which is not, like, I think that, yeah, it's not something that people are always willing to like be sort of candid about. I think scientists think that they have to like suppress subjectivity in order to be objective, but I kind of think it's the opposite. I think you need to like really expose it and be aware of it, and only then can you like kind of be like, okay, I'm clearly approaching this question as a person living in this day and age with these, experiences, and maybe I'm going to be asking my line of questioning in a way that is reflective of that, and how can I
Right.
sidestep that to get closer to objectivity?
Amazing. Thanks for answering so thoroughly.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah,
I would
and I'm
love to.
sorry if
Oh,
that
go
was a
ahead.
little loaded or anything, but no, that was
No, it's
you're
valuable.
amazing.
I want to know about like your experience as someone who is representing more of not a non-academic scientist, who you're a person who is very explicit about pursuing the social dimension of citizen science, and of like your relationship to fungi and mycology. And I wanted to know like what that experience has been like for you, and if have you felt over time that you've like, do you actually, my first question is, do you identify as a scientist?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, I do.
good.
And I'm like, period.
Yeah, good. I love that.
I think, yeah, I think science is, I'm doing science when I go out and observe,
Yeah.
nature. I'm doing science, when I go out to same location 3 times in a week to notice what the rain has done and how the water and how the earth has shifted and what plants are doing, I feel like I'm doing science.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, I do see myself as a scientist. Um, yeah, it's been interesting. And I think you asked me this last year when we did a similar chat, and I'm interested. I should go back and check out that question and see how my answers differ. But it's been an interesting year. Not just navigating that, but I do feel like a scientist. Recently, just some of the work is being recognized, and I don't want to say legitimized, because I don't want to give anybody power over like legitimizing any of our knowledge or any of our ways of doing things. But yeah, being recognized, there's some legitimacy that goes to it, that goes along with
Sure.
that, and there's some, um, you know, uh, yeah, it feels good to know that some of your ideas or ways of looking at things aren't just in your own head, and you're not just making things up, and
Yeah.
yeah, they're based on something real and tangible, and so yeah, recently I had the honor of being appointed to the Earth Keepers program, which is being started under the Yaquis of Southern California, here in Southern California on Kumeyaay land. And we're focusing on earth stewardship and kind of language revitalization, and fulfilling our obligations to Mother Nature. Really, it's what it comes down to. And so for me, that's been a recent honor that I've been nominated to, and I think it only comes from my ability to be able to navigate science and traditional ways of knowing, and trying to honor these things and represent in a good way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really awesome. I think that's really exciting for you.
Yeah, I appreciate
And
it.
for all of us, frankly, like, shared,
Yeah.
like, I don't know. I feel like definitely I, there are like the success of multiple people is just, it betters everyone. So it's exciting for you and for anyone in community with you, I think. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
No, and I think, and I'm glad because I get to, share these conversations that, that normally probably wouldn't be shared, especially from the perspective that I come from. Like, I am not academically trained. I did grow up in an area that didn't value science, that didn't value connecting with nature. It was more about hustling, getting a job, getting out the hood, and so, I recognize, first and foremost too, that, it's a privilege to be able to you know, being able to like study science and pursue something that's, you know, kind of looked upon as like a hobby, something that's looked upon as, you know, not anything that's going to bring any food to the table or that's going to do anything for me, you know, for my social status. You know, in fact, from where I came from, and like anything, any type of study, you know, that had to do with nature or science, you know, you're considered it's either nerdy or hippie or you know, and it definitely wasn't encouraged. So, you know, you know, having to, you know, kind of push forward with my interest in science and these things, and then like bring it to, you know, to my community in the language that they can speak, you know, in the language and from a person that they can identify with,
Mm-hmm.
um, is kind of the important role that I've been playing recently.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm proud
It's
of it.
super vital. I mean, it is unfortunately like common schism between people who like, you know, people who end up in academia and then people who can relate to people outside of academia.
Right,
And that it like I think science definitely has a big problem of undervaluing science communication, which I think is a gendered issue largely,
right,
and a racialized issue as well. So I think that, you know, and I think in the labor of communication is seen as sort of frivolous or I don't, you know, a skill that's not possessed by like the most, you know, like ardent of thinkers. You know, you're sort of
right,
someone like if you're like a really serious scientist, you're usually like in the, you know, the historical imaginary, you were a white man with like, you know, work, you know, toiling alone in your
right,
basement or in your
right.
lab, and you didn't have time to talk about like what you were doing to the like anyone who's too dumb to like immediately understand. And
Right, right.
so like I think that that myth, like kind of myth, is slowly becoming deconstructed, which is great, but it's still very much present like functionally. Um, I think that we, you know, it's just even in the ways in which we're like now criticizing the fact that like any man who was like working like that probably had a wife who was like cooking for him and cleaning for him and like literally keeping him alive, and
Yeah,
that's like not addressed or credited at all, like the labor of that. But then of course also that like people who do not possess those sort of like, you know, what we consider genius traits in these ways,
right,
are actually sometimes better scientists. They're more collaborative. They can
right,
explain what they're doing. They can relate the value of their pursuit to like the application in a clear way. They build community around like their lab space.
yeah,
So I think that there is definitely a shift in that. Although there's a long way to go for sure.
yeah. My 9-year-old likes to remind me that if women were allowed to do more science and weren't kept from doing science and being funded early on, that
Mhm.
we would have had flying cars right now. And so it's just like
Yeah,
that's the man's fault.
totally. I feel like yeah, it's hard. It can be painful to think about like what could have been if half the population was allowed, or you know, well, certainly when you just think about gender, but then also the exclusion of groups along different lines. Just
Right.
so the vast majority of people have been excluded by one by one cross section or another, and it is painful to think about what the world would be like if that
Mm,
wasn't true. So yeah, the history of colonialism and of sexism is super baked into the structures that host science,
right.
and I think the most like potent manifestation of that right now, although there's very many, is climate change and the destruction of the planet, which it was absolutely not inevitable, by any means. It's very much the product of this like singular trajectory that happened forcibly by way of like, you know, the supremacy of this of a particular, you know, Western European ideology.
Mm,
Um, that many people participate in now, regardless of their identity. It's upheld by many, but it is, I think that is the outcome. Like, so I think that I do believe that science, though, does have a role in mitigating these harms. And I think that it is something that I think we need, but I do think we need both community and science and community science to, it's not something that, I don't believe in like this idea of like techno salvation that will just invent our way out of these problems. I think it is a more horizontal approach of recasting many aspects of the ways of our value systems and our relationships, for sure.
Same. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I'm also reminded too of some of the early mycologists not receiving credit and being quote unquote peasant women or women in the country who collected mushrooms, knew their medicinal properties. A lot of early medicine work, which was science work, was done, in the field and, in folk settings. And in a lot of the doctors and folks who had access to labs, have admitted to, having learned a lot of what they knew from, again, quote unquote, women, country women, peasant women. These are women who would sell mushrooms and sell herbs and plants on the side of the road, these are the women who held the knowledge around these medicines and foods and folklore and all these things. And then there's a lot of information in folklore too, and stories. And so, just mentioning that early work too by some of those unknown early mycologists.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that historically there were more women in mycology in the very early days because it was not considered as serious as other disciplines. So they were like, oh yeah, you can have that. You can have that weird. You can do that weird stuff. That's
right, yeah, sure, you can have that.
But I mean, obviously, yeah, that not limited to fungi, but as you were saying, plants and other the various uses of different organisms for medicine and for healing and for culinary uses. So
yeah, a lot of the early chemistry work was inspired by some of that work,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And it is exciting to continue to tap into that. I think it still kind of is a gift that keeps on giving, as long as we're giving credit where credit is due and being understanding of sort of that legacy. I think is really important. Yeah.
Beautiful.
What do you? I mean, are there ways in which you feel like your community is challenged by any? What are some of the struggles that POC Fungi is working through?
I guess sometimes just not being taken seriously. We definitely have made some waves and are not welcomed in all spaces, and we are in very many. And I'll say that, including here in NAMA. There's been. I mean, we've had people walk out on some of our conversations. I've given talks before where we have folks just get up and walk out and shaking their head, and saying no. And I've gone into different chat rooms and mushroom things, and it's obvious when somebody's ignoring you, going around your conversation.
Yeah.
And I've seen that happen in discussions and panel discussions. I've heard some of our work vaguely mentioned, but then kind of contradicted. Yeah, and so I think there's I've seen a bit of push of for that little bit more of I don't know, things that are reminiscent of all lives matter, and why are you separating things? Why does the race and politics and why does gender have to be brought into it? And and for somebody who can't get away from my race and my gender and my identity, everything's political, everything is intersectional in that way, and so um, yeah, in that way, it's just been a little bit of challenge
Totally.
in some of
I
that, but yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that, just affirming what you were saying about, like, unfortunately, like, obviously, I think ideally you wouldn't have to, no one would grapple with these things, right? I think there's some people who mistakenly believe that, it's like just pleasant and fun for us to, like, talk about the history of colonialism and
Yes, yep,
sexism, but it's very much the opposite. It's like kind of at times a very painful labor,
yep,
um, and the choice was sort of taken away from us to be able to just exist in these spaces objectively, and
yeah,
that's completely. If you have had that experience previously, you're also like not a bad person at all. But I think it just, if a good allyship would give platform us and give us the space to have these conversations without it being like just questioned. Not that you
right,
can't ask questions, but questioning the very premise, I think, is um
right. Well, and then there's something about that, right? Like
mm,
when you feel like shame for speaking up about something that you're feeling, and like that you're calling, that you don't even think of as calling out, but you're like just trying to bring some attention to in the most nicest, gentlest way, but it's already met with this resistance. And it's like, I'm not trying to change everything, but recently, I think I've become a little more explicit in this past couple of years, and a little more unapologetic. And so, I think, and just supported by a lot of others.
mhm.
And so a little bit of support from few people is feels good, as opposed to,
It does, yeah.
you know, um, yeah, like realizing I don't need the support of every single person in this field,
Right,
but
yeah,
that's
because
hard to,
you're
it's
not
hard
gonna
to,
get it.
yeah, you're not going to get it, but it's hard, being in this capitalist world, and even on social media, and you start to compare yourself to other folks, and you're like, I have to remind myself, like, that's not what we're doing. We're
Mhm.
also not sponsored. We also don't have any money. Everything that we've done has been grassroots and community led. All funds like raised have always been through fundraising. We engage in a lot of mutual aid, and so there's a lot of differences, and like just reminding myself and community of that we're doing something like way different than
Yeah,
anybody else, and so
and I think
there's no, we didn't compare
yeah,
ourselves.
and you can be proud of the ways in which you're, like, very consistent in the application of your values. At least from my perspective,
Yeah,
it's that's challenging in and of itself. It can be hard to resist sometimes the, like, temptations of, like, easier ways, or quote unquote easier.
yeah,
But speaking of, like, politics a little bit, I do want to just talk about the Armenian mycology group that,
please,
yeah,
yes,
yeah, because I'm a co-founder of the International Congress of Armenian Mycologists, which I co-founded with three really good friends of mine, Tanya, Arik, and Claudia, and we're all ethnically Armenian. And we all live in the United States, so we are members of the Armenian diaspora, which is extremely small. There are very few Armenians generally in the world, but um, you know, we are all descendants of genocide survivors. So we are very our identities of Armenianness are just really important to us for that reason. There are very few of us, and we've had, like, a long history of surviving genocide and colonialism at the hands of the Ottoman Empire, and then subsequently through kind of the modern configuration of Turkey and Azerbaijan, which are two neighboring countries of ours that both have these, like, fascist authoritarian regimes that are very explicit about their desire to compromise, if not fully eradicate, the country of Armenia. So it's, you know, a challenging identity, because it is one that is very much like marked by pain and struggle, but also we have a tremendous amount of pride in being Armenian, and it's a like, I don't know, it's just both things at once. It's everything. It's, you know, both challenging and beautiful. But recently there was a war last year, in last fall, like the fall of 2020. There was like a resurrection of fighting or over a land that Armenians refer to as Artsakh, but is also known as Nagorno-Karabakh, which is a ethnically Armenian, like indigenously Armenian area that was basically after the fall of the Soviet Union, which did briefly have control of Armenia. There was a parcel of land that was sort of negotiated to Azerbaijan despite being indigenously Armenian. And Azerbaijan as a country is only like 100 years old, and Armenians have been in the Armenian highlands, which is like borders Iran, northern Iran, and Iran in Syria. So Armenians have lived there for thousands of years. And then in this like kind of geopolitical land grab, Azerbaijan was given control over these indigenous Armenian lands. And then kind of subsequently, there have been a number of really basically pogroms and ethnic cleansing events. There was a war in 1980 around 1980, where Artsakh established independence from Azerbaijan and wanted to be like a sovereign state. And it was a really devastating and bloody war. But then now, for basically 40 years later, Azerbaijan kind of without much warning launched an offensive to like reclaim that land. And it's a very intense, like geopolitical, complex struggle. There are like, you know, allyships that you would not expect, perhaps. I mean, depending on what your politics are, but Israel, for example, was funding the war with weapons, all of the drones that Azerbaijan used, which was the most drones used in a war almost ever. They were all from Israel, which is funded by the United States. And it was really just it resurrected a lot of ancestral trauma for Armenians, generational trauma of genocide. It was explicitly like ethnic, the conflict, and was some of the statements made by Azerbaijani government officials are like explicitly genocidal, like not like unapologetically genocidal. So the fate of Armenia is like still sort of tenuous. It's a very, very small country, only has about 2 million people, 2 to 3 million people. And it's like so much of our historical lands have been lost to the Turkic state and to Azerbaijan. So we as Armenians wanted to leverage our skills as scientists to contribute to sort of Armenian vibrancy and recovery and investment in land and in like the study of land and study of biodiversity in Armenia. So I wanted to give that like lengthy backstory because it is critical to like the formation of our group, and kind of tying back to what we had been talking about moments ago, which is that like this is political for us, and we have to like unfortunately take that on, and that choice like has been made for us. So our goal as a group is to conduct mycological research with our collaborators in Armenia. We have a number of really awesome friends and collaborators working in Armenia, and our mission is to raise money for them through grants, through community fundraising, collaborate by publishing papers together and studying fungal biodiversity in Armenia. Different members of the group have different expertises. So like I'm a taxonomist and a biodiversity researcher. We have a mycorrhizal ecologist, Claudia. Tanya studies bioinformatics, and Arik also is studying mycorrhizal fungi. So and then one of our colleagues, Arsen Gasparian, is a lichenologist, and then we have like a number of other colleagues who work on different aspects of fungal biology. So it's really exciting the Armenia is like really diverse. We have huge mountains and valleys and all this land in between, so that the kind of topographical diversity is really enormous. So that leads to all sorts of biological diversity. But generally, it's just not been very well studied because of its chaotic social history. So the government of Armenia, has to spend a lot of money on defense. So that's diverted away often from other, the things that make life worth living, including, exploring science and just sort of passionate, being able to engage with the natural landscape. Armenians also have like a long traditional history of being very intimately associated with our landscape. That so much of Armenian poetry is about the land. And actually, this is one of my favorite little fun facts, but the Armenian flag is red, blue, and orange. And the orange is actually from the apricot, which is one of our most special fruits. And actually, the Latin name for the apricot is Prunus armeniensis, which, as a little nod, the apricot is indigenous also to Armenia. And I love to think about like our ancestors choosing the juiciest, sweetest apricots and like continuing to plant those over thousands of years, and now the world gets to enjoy them. So there's so much beauty. Yeah, so we are in the midst right now of doing a fundraiser for the our colleagues in Armenia. We're trying to basically put together some laboratory equipment that could be used for basic research. And unfortunately, a lot of the science equipment the prices are set by global markets, but then like people living in, really economically disadvantaged places have then to, try to buy the same stuff, but it costs proportionally so much more. So the fundraiser is, trying to help alleviate that. And we've also been pursuing some other grants, and we've actually, I think, gotten 2 out of 2 of the grants we've applied for different like research questions, which is really exciting. So we're starting to make some moves, and I know partly why you invited me to talk tonight was to boost that campaign. I'm hoping that Claudia, because I think I see Claudia commenting a lot, but I think she's dropping the links in the comments. So Claudia is one of our co-founders. So
Thanks,
yeah,
Claudia.
if you can't give, I know it's really hard now for so many reasons, but if you can just share it, that's so meaningful to us. And follow us on Instagram. Like the Armenian Mycology has our own Instagram, so you can follow us there and just support us, which would be meaningful. Yeah. But thanks so much for the platform to talk about it. I know I spewed a lot of like political, history, but I do think so many people don't know where Armenia is or about Armenians. A lot of people think we're in like Central Europe. I hear a lot of people like confuse Armenia with like Albania, which is nowhere near. No issue with Albania, but like we're just have nothing to do with Albania. People get that mixed up a lot. So yeah, it requires often a lot of backstory. But Armenians have a long history of being in solidarity with other groups, and I'm proud of our Armenian heritage in that regard as well.
Thank you so much for sharing and going in depth with that. I really, really, really appreciate it. It's crucial that we know some of those details, and especially right now with indigenous land being encroached on everywhere, and in Palestine, as I mentioned as well. This month commemorates here. Tonight kicks off our Zapatista Month, is a month long of events dedicated to education around the Zapatistas, which is an indigenous group in Mexico and the state of Chiapas that uprose in 1994. Indigenous group, uprose, and since then has still been, fighting for land sovereignty and access just to their own land, and so I'm reminded of indigenous land being encroached on everywhere, like in Palestine and Armenia, Sudan and places in Africa right now as well, and so it's real, and so And I think, yeah, like I think you said earlier in the conversation, I think mycology and mushrooms are kind of a great vehicle to bring some of this in, and introduce this other audience I see has a lot of power and potential and like influence in the world today, with
Yeah,
the shroom boom taking off and everything.
totally.
I think it's important that folks are aware of their impacts, on the market and their impacts on the globe, and how things are impacting folks on the ground and farmers. And so yeah, just appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you. Yeah, we want in our mission statement for our International Congress of Armenian Mycologists, we are explicit in naming this, that we're in solidarity with indigenous movements all around the world. And I think that certainly we're all stronger when we can support one another, and while our issues might manifest, there's different permutations and kind of expressions of our struggles, but ultimately they're very similar. So and intimately tied to biodiversity. So one thing that we're really explicit about is that biodiversity declines with colonialism, and that's true all around the world. And therefore, as part of resistance to colonialism, an investment in biodiversity is like part of our vision for our anti-colonial work. So I think that is sort of the central crux of a lot of what we do.
Yes, I
Yeah,
love
laugh
it.
back.
Well, I think as a matter of climate justice, I think it's important. I think it's
Hmm.
important that we look at traditional ways, and the way folks who've been stewarding the land have done it.
Yeah,
And so,
absolutely.
yeah, I really appreciate you being here. If anybody has any questions for us,
Yeah,
we're here for it.
thank you for being with me, and thank you for everyone listening. I appreciate it.
Can I share some of your good news
Oh
and
yeah,
say
yeah.
congratulations on getting
Oh,
married?
thank you.
And just yeah, I know you had like two moves last year. You're at Bard
Yeah,
College now. You're hired on, I think.
yeah. So I got married,
Woo-hoo.
which was very lovely. And
Yay. I love love.
thank you. Yes. And then I started a job as a professor at Bard College, in New York, and it's a 2-year position. It's a visiting position, so I don't really know what will happen after 2 years. But I've been teaching a natural history of the Hudson Valley class, which I think my students loved this semester. I had them read Robin Kimmerer, and we were outside all the time, and it was perfect for me. And I think they liked it too. Uh,
Cool.
and yeah, I'm excited I love teaching, so I love working with students, and yeah, I'm excited to be back in New York where I'm from. So
Yay.
thank you.
Very cool. Yeah, no, thank you. Really grateful for our friendship as well. And yeah, anything I could do to support you in your work, as I'm sure I have your support too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, if anyone else has follow-up questions, I'm happy to, you can send them to the ICAM. You can follow me on Instagram too, although I sometimes get I have some anxiety about my Instagram is not open publicly, so I try to go through, and if we have mutuals. But if you want to follow our ICAM page, that's open to the public. And then I'm also on Twitter, at Queendom Fungi. So you can follow me on Twitter as well. I keep that one open as well. So yeah, that would be, you can contact me through those that avenues if you have follow-up questions.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any questions coming in from anybody, so I'm assuming everybody's just processing and just amazed at everything we just shared. Um, so yeah, thank you again. I
Yeah,
really appreciate it. And
thank you.
well, keep visioning and dreaming. You coming to Southern California, hopefully sometime
Oof.
soon.
Yes, yes. Count me in. whenever
Yeah.
it
But
happens.
as things cool down, and
Hmm.
again, wishing everybody good health and safety and protection.
Hmm.
Drink your teas and bundle up.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Bye, everyone. Good night.
Take care. Good
Happy
night.
weekend. Yeah. Be safe. Be healthy. Okay. Bye.
Take care. Okay. Good night, everybody. Thank you, Tacos and SD, for sure. Let me see how to end this. Okay. Good night. Bye.